Śrīmad Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada ki jai. Śrīmad Bhāgavatam Morning Class ki jai. Gaur Premanandi. What verse does that say up there? What text number? 20. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Reading from Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 33, text number 20. Is that on? Is that it? Yeah, that's on. Good. Hitvatad vishatamam apyakandala yoshitam kinchit chakra bhadanam putra vishleshanantura itvatalipsitatamam apikandala yoshitam kinchit chakravaranam putra vishleshananatura
Hitvatad-ipsitatamam apiyakhandala-yositam kinchit-chakra-vadanam putra-vishleshanatura Hitvatad-ipsitatamam apiyakhandala-yositam Kinchit Chakravadanam Putra Vishleshanatura.
No ladies here. Hitva, having given up. That household. Ipsitatanam, most desirable. Api, even. Akandala Yoshitam, by the wives of Lord Indra. Kinchit Chakravadanam, she wore a sorry look on her face. Putra Vishleshana, by separation from her son. Aturha, afflicted. Translation. Although her position was unique from all points of view, saintly Devahuti, in spite of all her possessions, which were envied even by the ladies of the heavenly planets, gave up all such comforts. She was only sorry that her great son was separated from her. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Devahuti was not at all sorry at giving up her material comforts, but she was very much aggrieved at the separation of her son. It may be questioned here that if Devahuti was not at all sorry to give up the material comforts of life, then why was she sorry about losing her son? Why was she so attached to her son? The answer is explained in the next verse. He was not an ordinary son. Her son was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One can give up material attachment, therefore, only when one has attachment for the Supreme Person. This is explained in Bhagavad Gita, Paramdrisva Nivartate. Only when one actually has some taste for spiritual existence can he be reluctant to follow the materialistic way of life. So this verse is describing the life and soul, the activities, the consciousness of the devotees of the Lord. So, in this world, of course, we see that material attachment, as described here, is not very easy to give up. In fact, practically it's impossible. For material attachment, it's on? For material attachment, not only can people not give it up, but people are literally mad for material attachment. They will, for a little bit of sense gratification, a little bit of happiness of the senses, the body and the mind in Kali Yuga, people will very quickly take some drug that's practically like a poison that could kill them in a few minutes, could destroy their life. They will kill, they will steal, they will do practically anything that you would consider unimaginable that someone will do. For a little bit of happiness, they will do that. So therefore, the question of giving up, material attachment, that's just a whole nother concept. When someone is, determined, mad, that you can't talk sense to them, they can't hear good advice, they're just determined to do something at the expense of themselves or others, and there's just nothing that can stop them. For them to give up sense gratification is just out of the question. Now, yet, Srila Prabhupada understood that if people could hear the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, hear the message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they could be delivered from that material attachment. Now, today, of course, is the anniversary of Srila Prabhupada going to the USA. So, because that's literally the theme of this verse, not coincidentally, I'm going to tell that story. So, I prepared a couple of notes, 25 pages. I hope you can let me indulge myself in this spiritual sense gratification. So, to tell this story, we're going to go back to 1958. 1958 was my year of birth, actually. Where, thank you. Now, these are all excerpts. I've gone back to Prabhupada Leela Reader, Volume 9, starting with Volume 1, starting with Chapter 9, and just selecting the most essential parts related to this story, and we're going to go up to Chapter 11, so 9, 10, 11, 3 chapters there. So, in 1958, this is discussing how Srila Prabhupada returned to Bombay for preaching. After some months in Vrindavan, Abhay decided to go back to Bombay and preach. In Bombay, he quickly broke off his association with the stifling Bharatiya Vijay and moved out of the faculty residence there. Staying a week at a time in the homes of various patrons, he tried to generate interest in his missionary activities. Is that the microphone? A little bit of feedback. especially for the people at home. Could be. That's good. Thank you. Yeah. When a friend of Acharya Prabhupada's arranged for Abai to address Sunday evening crowds at a Bombay beach, Abai accepted. And as we know, of course, Abai, we're speaking about Srila Prabhupada. Following already established custom, he sat on a cushion and the people gathered from 500 to 1,000, sitting and listening as he loudly spoke the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. Abai spoke for several nights, and there were other lecture opportunities also. One week, he spoke several times at a Bombay Vishnu temple. But Abai wanted to do more than deliver occasional lectures to uncommitted audiences. So you see here the seed of Srila Prabhupada's desire to, take Krishna consciousness all over the world. This is the theme that you see in this story. The conviction was growing within him that he should preach outside India. He was ready to travel anywhere if he could fulfill Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's order to preach in English. One time Srila Prabhupada said that if Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had ordered him to go to the forest and preach, he would have done that. But he ordered him instead to go to the west, the big cities. In India, the English-speaking population was small. So, of course, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wanted him to preach in English in the West. So Abai continued to dream of going to the West. If he could travel to Bombay, Delhi and Kanpur, why not to London or New York, where millions spoke English and had never heard the message of Lord Chaitanya? Writing to Mr. Ved Prakash in Kanpur, a Kanpur industrialist, Abai explained his idea. Quote, Lord Chaitanya said, Pramanam Upakara, that is to say, for the benefit of all living beings concerned, while rendering first aid service in the battlefield, the Red Cross men, although equally disposed to all the wounded soldiers, they give first preference to the hopeful ones. The hopeless ones are sometimes neglected. In India, even after the attainment of Swaraj, independence, the mentality is predominant by made in London ideas. It's a long story, but in a nutshell, the leaders of India, in the name of secular government, they have engaged themselves in everything foreign. They have carefully set aside the treasure house of India's spiritual asset, and they are imitating the westernized material way of life, constantly engaged in the acts of error, of judgment, misgivings, imperfectness and duplicity. India's Vedic knowledge is above all the conditional defects mentioned above, but we Indians at the present moment have neglected such wonderful Vedic knowledge. It is due to its improper handling. This Vedanta Sutra is now mishandled by unauthorized persons in different camps, and as such the people are being misguided. Newly sprung up national enthusiasm on the Indian leaders, industrialists and plan makers has no time neither desire to understand the message of Vedanta Sutra or even the Bhagavad Gita. You cannot do acts of humanity without proper guidance. So my idea of preaching in the foreign countries means that they are rather fed up with material advancement of knowledge. They are seeking the message, guidance of the Vedanta Sutra, or for the matter of the Bhagavad Gita, in an authorized way. And I am sure that India will again go back to the Vedantic life when the principle is accepted by the Europeans, Americans, etc. Because the Indian people are now in the habit of begging after neglecting their own property. That was my point of view, but all the same, we must take only the opportunity of service, unquote. So, Srila Prabhupada, such a nice example that the first day in a battlefield, the Red Cross, although they equally disposed everyone, but they first give preference to the hopeful ones, and the hopeless ones are sometimes neglected. So he was thinking, India is hopeless. Let's go and preach to some, to foreign countries where there may be some hope. Such a nice example. So, so Srila Prabhupada up to this point has been preaching. He's just been, knocked back, and just sees, that preaching in India is, they'll only accept it if he goes to the West and they accept it, then India, and that actually is what happened. Srila Prabhupada revived Krishna consciousness in India. The only reason there's some enthusiasm for the study of the scriptures and attendance in the temples and in India now is because of what Srila Prabhupada did in the West. Otherwise it was just disappearing at a rate that was very lamentable. One way of expanding his way of preaching was to mail copies of Back to Godhead outside India. And as an incentive for enlisting donors, he made it known that the donor's name would be printed on each copy. His ambition was to bring in large donations, run large printings, and send Back to Godhead to more than 50 countries. He assigned quotas. America will receive 10,000 copies, Argentina 500, Belgium 500, Brazil 500, Burma 1,000, Canada 500, Chile 500, China 10,000, and so on, including 10,000 for Russia and 10,000 for England. But the donors and donations never appeared, and the plans for Back to Godhead were never realised. You couldn't find donors in India. Abai found that while the people of India's educated, cultured class were rejecting their own spiritual culture, the religiously inclined masses were being baffled by an array of conflicting, unauthorized doctrines presented in the name of Hinduism. An alarming example of this came to his attention as he was preaching in Bombay during the summer of 1958. Bhagavat Week was being publicised by a group whose teachings conflicted with the pure parampara presentation of the Bhagavat. The Bhagavat, Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, was the devotional scripture par excellence, the literary incarnation of Krishna, yet the organisers of Bhagavat Week were using Śrīmad Bhāgavatam to teach impersonalism and minimise Lord Krishna. Through friends, Abai learned of the outrageous meetings, and finally, on July 28, 1958, he wrote to the Bhagavat Week leader, Sri Ratansi, imploring him to stay away from Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. Quote, "I beg to inform you that I am in receipt of your invitation letter in the matter of observing Bhagavat Week through the Secretary of Bombay Spiritual Culture. As I know what sort of Bhagavat Week can be observed by the Mayavadins for misleading the innocent public, and therefore I not only restrain myself from attending the function, but also I advise many others not to attend for the very reason that the recitation of the Holy Bhagavat is being performed by men who have no access in this great scripture, in which only the liberated persons who are freed from all pretentious religiosities can take part. Some friends who attended your Bhagavat Week have told me how the pastimes of Lord Krishna were being wrongly interpreted in your organisation on the pretext of saving Krishna from being an immoral personality. To save these foolish audiences in future, Maharaj Pariksit had already asked Sripad Sukadev Goswami to clear the Rasa Leela activities of Lord Sri Krishna. The transcendental nature of Rasa Leela does not require to be apologised by any Mayavadi or mundane moralist. The Leela is what it is. In the shloka number 30, it is forbidden that a mundane person should indulge in hearing Rasa Leela or should hear Rasa Leela from a mundane person. In your organisation, both the audience and the lecturer are mundane persons, and their indulgence in the matter of Rasa Leela out of sheer foolishness will result in imitating Rudra, who swallowed up an ocean of poison. Unquote. Very stern letter by Srila Prabhupada. Abai warned that the legal action could be taken up against such a religious fraud, but Bhagavat Week continued and hundreds were cheated. While the professed followers of Vedic culture were being baffled in their allegiance, modern westernized Indians were rejecting Vedic culture as backwards and irrelevant. And when I first joined ISKCON, we didn't get a lot of Indian people come to ISKCON. And, you know, this was a strong mood there. And apart from that, if they did accept Vedic culture to some degree, but not with a lot of faith, but to some degree, they couldn't understand how Westerners could be Brahmanas or followers of Vedic culture. So they really didn't put a lot of faith in ISKCON. There was Prime Minister Nehru, who wasn't at all spiritually inclined. He was for modernisation and for what Abai called made in London ideas. At least Mahatma Gandhi, although he had never responded to Abai's letters, had been spiritually inclined, but not so his follower, Pandit Nehru. Still, out of concern for the way India's leaders were rejecting their country's spiritual heritage, Abai decided to write Pandit Nehru. Although in Bombay, Abai was practically homeless, in 1958 he boldly wrote the Prime Minister expressing his conviction that India's spiritual culture must not only be revived at home, but also be distributed to the West. He reminded Pandit Nehru that from ancient Greece down to the atomic age, the Western world had seen only materialism and had therefore never known peace. If Nehru were to continue following the path of materialism, the only results would be strife and war. This is a quote from Srila Prabhupada. Therefore, India may not waste her time in imitating the Western way of life. You have admitted it that the position of Indian culture is of high order, but at the same time you want to bring in material prosperity by scientific advancement of knowledge. But what is that scientific knowledge? Spiritualism is also advanced scientific knowledge. Material advancement of scientific knowledge cannot give even material prosperity to the people in general. Do you think that horseless carriage or telephonic or radio communication or any other such ephemeral facilities of life can bring in material prosperity? No, it cannot. Material prosperity means that people must have sufficient to eat or to maintain the body very soundly. Do you think that your different plans have brought in that material prosperity, or that modern Western civilization can bring in that prosperity? Even though given that facility, the unrest will continue to go on till there is spiritual satisfaction of life. That is the secret of peace. It's very interesting because, you know, the cost of keeping up a lifestyle based upon material, technological advancement is becoming almost impossible. In Australia, which is a very affluent country in the world, the latest statistics are that 50% of Australians are paying more for their power, and gas, etc., than their mortgage. And that the majority of them are struggling to keep up, and people are reducing their eating in order to pay their bills. And the way things are set up, even if you don't use the electricity or the gas, you still have to pay so much every month, just the fact that it's connected. And they're struggling just to keep that up. And that's Australia.
Why don't you use sun power?
What's that?
Sun power. Solar.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, the main thing Prabhupada's saying, that material prosperity means that people must have sufficient to eat and maintain the body soundly. Actually, the heavy price of maintaining the industrial, technological way of life means that people are going without homes, proper food, and basic things like that. And people have to work so hard, both parents, and for them both to work, they have to put their children in childcare, so that the children not even been looked after by the parents, and it costs them about $100 a day. And so one parent is literally working to just get someone else to look after the child, and the other one is struggling to keep up with the mortgage and if they've got a home, like that. So, it appears to be prosperous, but it's not. More and more we're going backwards, where the basic things that people need to do, they can't do, yet the external, maintaining this technological and industrialised way of life, it's wonderful, but as Prabhupada always said, you can't eat nuts and bolts, So it's very sound advice. One may think, oh, this is so backwards, Just like, modern technology, with computers we're supposed to save paper and save time. We use more paper than ever, and people, are now being, warned that at some stage when they go home, they've got to turn their devices off. They're with the family. So, it's a problem. When people go home, their work continues so instead of saving time, it's actually more time. So there's no progress at all. It's just a complete backward step. And this is what Prabhupada is saying exactly here. And still they're doing. So he's saying that for satisfaction, there must be spiritual satisfaction. Then there's peace. So then we go on with our story. Even without having been to the West, Abai expressed his conviction that the Americans and even the Russians were hankering for spiritual realization. They could not have become satisfied merely with material advancement. So he understood that. He's never been there, but he understands. The whole history is just materialism. They've never had a spiritual culture. So how can anyone have peace? Pandit Nehru, therefore, should help his friends in the West by offering them spiritual knowledge in India. So there's certain things devotees know when they first meet a person. There's certain things that devotees know about a person before that person even opens their mouth. If they're not engaged in Krishna consciousness, spiritual life, there's so many things a devotee knows. I remember, when people started seeing it fashionable to have some spirituality in their life, and they would sort of come to the temple occasionally, then some of them would say, yes, I'm also celibate. And I would just say, no, you're not. Well, sometimes. Well, that's not celibate. But, people say things, but a devotee knows, no, it's just not going to happen. So Prabhupada understood. Here, poverty means poverty of knowledge. here again, quote from Prabhupada, that Prime Minister Chanakya used to live in a thatched cottage, but he was the dictator of India during the time of Chandragupta. Mahatma Gandhi voluntarily accepted the way of living of the so-called poor man and was the dictator of Indian destiny. But was he poverty-stricken? He was proud of his spiritual knowledge. Therefore, spiritual knowledge makes a man really rich man, and not the radio set or the motor car, etc. So that's spiritual knowledge, that's wealth. Back in the 1930s, the Nehru family had bought their medicines from Abai's Prayag pharmacy, and Abai now appealed to Pandit Nehru as an old friend from Allahabad. Just as Abai had requested Mahatma Gandhi, he requested Nehru to leave his political responsibilities, quote, and as a popular gentleman of the world, engage the rest of your life in the organised spiritual movement to make a real adjustment of Western material science combined with Indian way of spiritual realisation, unquote. As with his letter to Gandhi, his letter to Nehru went unanswered. He's not really getting a lot of responses in India from people in general or the leaders. But he never stopped trying. Among Abai's former Bombay contacts was, Prabhupada used to say in preaching, you give the message and that's it. Your business is finished. Whether they take or not, that's not your business. We perform our duty and that's it. We're not attached to the result. It's between them and Krishna. We've done the best we can. But we can't neglect our duty for any reason. Among Abai's former Bombay contacts was Mr. Harbanslal, a landlord who had once assured Abai that he would provide him lodging whenever he needed. In the summer of 1958, Abai went to call on Mr. Harbanslal, only to find that he had gone to the west. When Abai learned that Mr. Harbanslal was travelling not only on business but on a cultural mission, his imagination seized on the idea of an Indian on a cultural mission in the west. He wrote to Mr. Harbanslal asking for a place to stay, but also presenting his own cultural mission. Abai knew that many Westerners respected Indian culture. He had heard from his German godbrother that although Indians who went to the West, especially to Germany, were well received, they were sometimes tested on their knowledge of Indian culture. So Abai advised Mr. Harbanslal to teach the real conclusion of Indian culture as he travelled. Quote, I think that people need this Indian message in this hour of necessity, when the atomic bomb is hovering over the head of the human society. Please therefore begin the activities for the benefit of all people in the foreign countries since you have gone there. Clearly, Abai would have liked to have gone himself. Abai also reminded Mr. Harbanslal of his promise to provide him with an apartment. Quote, I am passing my days in Bombay in great inconvenience for want of a suitable residential place, unquote. But the letter never caught up with the touring Mr. Harbanslal. Wanting to go to the west as soon as possible, Abai visited one of his godbrothers in Bombay, Kripa Sindhu, and asked him to help. So this is Kripa Sindhu speaking. He came to my house and asked me to help him in going to America. He gave me some Bhakti Godheads which he said I could show to people to ask for help on his behalf. I tried to do something in this regard. I introduced Abai Babu to one man, a big industrialist, Hembaraj Kandawala. I went also. The three of us sat down and I told the man how Abai wanted to go to the West and how he was a good devotee and was writing and doing so many things, but somehow or other the man did not help. Kripa Sindhu told Abai of how the Gaudiya Math in Bombay had sometimes been assisted by a pious business magnate, Mrs. Sumati Murarji, head of Scindia Steamship Lines. Abai tried to see her but was unable. He did, however, see one of Mrs. Maharaji's employees, a deputy manager for the Scindia company, who heard him out and, to Abhai's surprise, responded generously. Considering Abhai a genuine sadhu, the Scindia agent offered him a 50% concession on a voyage from India to the United States. He even put it in writing. Abhai immediately began arranging for his passport and visa, but he could not raise even the half fare. But you see here, so 1958, so he left in 1965, but you see, this is nearly 7 years he followed this lead from that point. So although so many knockbacks, just, something, and he made it into everything. That's a preacher. Back in 1956 in Delhi, he had been struggling and homeless, and now, as he considered his last 2 years of travelling out of Vrindavan, he felt that his position hadn't really improved. Perhaps Krishna didn't want him to succeed in this way. But one positive thing he had gained: determination to go to the West and preach. There he would surely meet with success. So, sometimes, we celebrate this day, Srila Prabhupada going to the USA. You sort of imagine Prabhupada just strolling down, jumping on the ship. But, what he had to do that is doing that, coming to the West itself at his age, that's one thing. But how he actually, persevered to make that happen, it was literally an impossibility. In every which way you look at it, and this is gives you this idea here. Alone and poor, Abhai returned to Vrindavan. He was 62, but he wasn't thinking of retiring. More than ever, his mood was reflective and renounced, because few people knew him, and because he wanted to write, he kept to himself. He enjoyed deep peace as a resident of Vrindavan. His mind and intelligence were free and dwelt constantly on his service to his spiritual master. He saw his present circumstances as a preparation for a greater task before him. Despite his advanced age, he felt that he had barely begun his work. Yet he felt confident. He had his vision of a world association of devotees. It was not an idle dream, although he was not certain how it would all come about. But he knew his duty. For the present, he would go on describing his vision, the vision of his predecessor spiritual masters, in articles and books. But as soon as possible, he should go to the West. Westerners, he had concluded, were not satisfied with a mentality, comfortable life devoid of spiritual understanding. More than his fellow Indians, they would be open to the message of the Absolute Truth. He knew he should go, and he would go if Krishna desired. Abhai lived frugally in Vrindavan, keeping exact account of every expenditure and every receipt. He carefully kept a ledger, just as if he were running a substantial business. Even though his purchases were only a little milk, a few vegetables, charcoal for cooking, bus rides, and his major expenditure postage. Mm-hmm. So I have a copy of that. You can get that in the book, his journal of his expenses. And, it's quite extraordinary to say, you write down, spend some money on books, because all his money, every paisa, was meant to get him to the West. So it was a big venture. So he's writing down, I bought some milk today, and that. So, now we're going to look at, here is a little bit, again, related to this. We're in December 1958, and he wrote Varaha Ashtaka for Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disappearance day. And this poem you can find. We have a book also, A Shower of Compassion. You've seen that book, got Prabhupada's different poems and what have you. So the full version of this is in there. It's quite a nice long poem. On the disappearance day of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati, Abai keenly felt separation from his spiritual master. He perfectly understood that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's instructions were more important than his physical presence, and that, in fact, the spiritual master was present within his instructions. In this way, Abai had always been with his spiritual master. Yet on this annual day, Abai could not help feeling loss. So, today's verse in the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, we're hearing about Devahuti feeling the loss of Krishna, of her son Kapila. He'd gone, so she was feeling separation. She was taking no pleasure in her possessions, but she was feeling separation from her son. Krishna is everywhere. So, one may ask, how can you feel separation from Krishna when he's everywhere like that? We were reading about Prahlad Maharaj, that as an innocent young child. To understand this, you have to understand how an innocent young child feels. So we get that nice example from Prahlad Maharaj, that when the mother's gone, the mother may only, or the father, have only just stepped out the door and the child cries. Even though they know the parents are just outside the door, the parent says, I'll be back in 2 minutes, I'm just getting there. And they'll cry, because it's natural, there's that, oh no, there's a separation. So the devotee is so attached that, they feel that separation, even though at the same time they feel the presence of the spiritual master present, Krishna is present. So this gives a little view into that transcendental rasa. On the disappearance day, So yet on this annual day, Abai could not help feeling loss. He remembered how in 1932 he had been a grihasta and a new disciple. At that time he had not been free to do as much service as now. Yet it had been in those years that he had been able to see his spiritual master, offer obeisances before him, eat the remnants of his prasadam, walk beside him, hear his voice, receive his personal glance. Abai thought of their meetings together. How powerful had been Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's mission. His presses had been running day and night, printing magazines, books, the daily Nadia Prakash. And Europe had been a promising new preaching field. With Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati the Kaur at the helm, the Gaudiya Math had entered into battle against Maya's forces, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had made all his disciples unafraid. Abai had always been eager to serve his spiritual master, to serve within the Gaudiya Math, with its headquarters in Calcutta, but exactly how he would serve had never been clear to him until his last letter from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati. Abai looked back on the more than 20 years since his spiritual master's disappearance. The Gaudiya Math had been undone by its leaders, and everyone else had scattered like leaves in a storm. It was an unspeakable loss, and it was an old story how the big sannyasis had disregarded their spiritual master's instructions and had intrigued, disputed, litigated. Violent party factions, false leaders claiming to be world Acharya, and which party had been right? No, both had been wrong. All wrong, because the Gaudiya Math had disintegrated. Now there were dozens of little maths and no preaching, no real preaching as before. When he, Shimhaguru, had cast fear into the Mayavadis, had led an army of young, powerful preachers to march throughout India and the world. And the greatest sufferers of the Gaudiya Math's dissolution were the people, the non-devotees, who had little hope of being delivered from the batterings of Maya. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had begun a spiritual revolution, but that revolution had now been overthrown by Maya. The scattered particles of the Gaudiya Math had settled quietly into self-satisfied, insular, almost impotent units, and it was the people in general who suffered. Abai groped after memories of his spiritual master. He felt secure in that his own relationship with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was intact, continual, yet he felt helpless. He was diligently pursuing his spiritual master's order to preach in English, yet without his spiritual master's physical presence, he felt small and very much alone. At times like this, he questioned the wisdom of having left his family and business. Lamenting Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's absence and the fall of the Gaudiya Math, he composed a Bengali poem, Viraha Ashtaka. So this is Srila Satsvati Goswami sort of summarising some of the main concepts here. Abai's was a dark view. The golden era of preaching that had flourished in the days of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was no longer. Quote, by the influence of Maya, Abai wrote, now everything is darkness. All devotional instructions have been destroyed, now everything has been reversed. Unquote. Meditating on that great personality possessed of the divine power to save the entire world, Abai expressed his feelings of weakness and helplessness. Quote, because of those not fixed in devotional service, many branches have spread all over. Your conclusive message did not touch the ear. Where will I get the strength for the Sankirtan movements? Unquote. How could he, a tiny spiritual child, survive without his spiritual master? Now who could save the world, which was so much more oppressed than ever before? Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said that a dead man could not preach. Only one with life could preach. As long as Abai and others could deeply regret the Gaudiya Math's failure, there was still life and still hope. Quote, if everyone obtained this right and went out and made disciples, then the suffering souls in the world could be saved. Unquote. It was useless to cry over what his godbrothers had done, yet in seeing and resenting it, Abai found within the pain of what might have been a continuing spark of what still might be. Abai sent his poem, this poem and Vrindavan Bhajan to Keshav Maharaj, who published them in the Gaudiya Patrika. So you see the situation of Srila Prabhupada, coming to the West. He's getting very little, no real interest from the public generally, from all the leaders, from the religionists and spiritualists and Hindus, from his own godbrothers. His spiritual master has left. Ordinarily, so he's feeling very, very, helpless. Yeah. So then we hear, there's some further inspiration from his spiritual master that inspired him to take sannyas as the next stepping stone. What to do? So this is 1959, about September. One night, Abai had a striking dream, the same dream he had had several times before, during his days as a householder. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati appeared, just as Abai had known him, the tall, scholarly sannyasi, coming directly from the spiritual world, from Krishna's personal entourage. He called to Abai and indicated that he should follow. Repeatedly he called and motioned. He was asking Abai to take sannyas. Come, he urged, become a sannyasi. Abai awoke in a state of wonder. He thought of this instruction as another feature of the original instruction Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had given him at their first meeting in Calcutta. The same instruction that his spiritual master had later solidified in a letter, become an English preacher and spread Krishna consciousness throughout the Western world. Sannyas was for that end. Otherwise, why would his spiritual master have asked him to accept it? By reason that his spiritual master was saying, now take sannyas and you'll actually be able to accomplish this mission. Formerly the time was not right. So, it's interesting because the most common quote I hear when devotees ask about dreams that they have about Krishna and the spiritual master, the most common quote I hear is where Prabhupada says something like, it's a little bit dismissive. I can't remember the exact quote, but it's almost like if someone asks that question, you're being told don't pay any notice to it. So that's a very common quote I hear people say when devotees ask, I had this dream and like that. But you see here, there are certain, as is sometimes said, on the pretext of a dream. Devotees sometimes do get instructions from the spiritual master, from Krishna. I had a dream about Prabhupada just a week ago. He was saying, because quite often in Bhaktivedanta, the topic of Vaishnava-Acharya comes up. And I always press it as the Bhagavatam does, that it's a no-no, don't do it. And sometimes, the question is, am I being too strong on that? Anyway, in this dream, Srila Prabhupada appeared said, I will be pleased if one comes to the temple even once a week, perhaps, 3-4 times in a month. But I will not be pleased if one commits Vaishnava-Acharya.
What is that last one?
I will not be pleased if one commits Vaishnava-Acharya. So, it's interesting because a devotee is actually making more spiritual progress if they come into the temple maybe even once a week, even 4 times a month, and not committing Vaishnava-Acharya than someone who is here every day committing Vaishnava-Acharya. That person who's coming less frequently is actually in a better position. Because, it's the Vaishnava-Acharya is displeasing to Prabhupada. So, anyway, but here we see that Srila Prabhupada certainly took that appearance of Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati as very significant, as guidance. So, Abhay deliberated cautiously. By accepting sannyas, a Vaishnava dedicates his body, mind and words totally to the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, renouncing all other engagements. He was doing that already. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had offered sannyas to his leading disciples so that they could continue his mission. They hadn't done it. Preaching in the West had proved perilous even for the Gaudiya most recognised sannyasis. How could he, a mere householder, presume he could succeed where others had failed? He was hesitant, so humble. The helpless, incapable feeling he had expressed in his Varaha Ashtaka was there, but now his spiritual master was beckoning him over all other considerations, even over natural humility. Now, although he was elderly and alone, the desire to preach, just as his spiritual master had preached, remained within him. A fierce, though sometimes quietly expressed determination. The Vedic standard and the example set by the previous acharyas was that if one wanted to lead a preaching movement, sannyas was required. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had taken sannyas to facilitate his missionary work. Lord Chaitanya had taken sannyas to further the Sankirtan movement. Of course, Lord Chaitanya was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But when his young students had been disrespectful towards him, treating him as an ordinary man, he had taken sannyas. Because a sannyasi is automatically respected, Lord Chaitanya's acceptance of sannyas was a calculated tactic. As soon as he began travelling throughout India as a sannyasi, he immediately attracted thousands of followers to the Sankirtan movement. Knowing that many cheaters would accept the saffron dress and abuse the respect given to sannyasis, Lord Chaitanya had advised against accepting sannyas in the age of Kali. He knew that cheaters in the guise of sadhus would act immorally, accumulate funds for their own sense gratification and make many followers simply to enhance their own prestige. Posing as swamis, they would cheat the public. Because the people in Kali are unable to follow the rules and regulations of sannyas, Lord Chaitanya had recommended that they simply chant Hare Krishna. However, if a person could actually follow the rules, and especially if he had to spread the Sankirtan movement, sannyas was necessary. Abai first had to approach one of his godbrothers for permission. He decided to turn to Bhaktivedanta Maharaj, who is formerly Kunjavihari, the leader of the Chaitanya Math in Calcutta. Abai still thought of the Chaitanya Math as the headquarters of his spiritual master's mission. During the heated legal disputes, the Chaitanya Math had been the most prized acquisition, and since 1948 it had been under the legal ownership of Bhaktivedanta Maharaj. Now, although each sannyasi had his own place or places, the Chaitanya Math and Bhaktivedanta Maharaj legally represented the Gaudiya Math entity. Abai felt that if he were to take sannyas and go preach in America, he should give the Chaitanya Math the first opportunity to support his work. In April 1959, Abai wrote to Tirtha Maharaj inquiring about sannyas as well as about the Chaitanya Math's printing some of his manuscripts, and since no one was going abroad, he volunteered to do so on behalf of the Chaitanya Math. Bhaktivedanta Tirtha Maharaj replied that Abai should first join the Chaitanya Math. He mentioned the strife that still lingered. Quote, "Those who are acting against Chaitanya Math, they are motivated by their individual ambitions." Unquote. Anyone who was against the Chaitanya Math, he said, was acting illogically and against the instructions of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So according to Tirtha Maharaj, the thing for Abai to do, the thing he had neglected to do for so many years, was join the Chaitanya Math and act under his direction. Tirtha Maharaj mentioned several members of the Chaitanya Math who had recently accepted the sannyas order, and he said that Abai could also become one in time. He invited Abai to come reside at the Chaitanya Math. Quote, "The houses that we have, there are rooms that are airy and well lit. We will treat you exclusively. There won't be any difficulty. We will take care that no inconveniences are caused. But as for printing books," this is the rest of the quote, "we're eagerly awaiting to print the books of like Satsandarbha, Vedanta, based on devotional service, and many other rare books by the Goswamis. First, we will print them. Books written by you will be checked by the editorial staff, and if the funds can be raised, then they can be printed according to priority. The books will be printed only if they are favourable for the service of the Chaitanya Math. Therefore, if the fund is raised, then there is a plan to go abroad as well." Abai was not encouraged. The main difficulty he felt was that the Chaitanya Math's shortage of funds. So here's a quote by Srila Prabhupada. "I was working with my broken typewriter. I went to our Tirtha Maharaj. 'You give me a room and print my books. Give me some money, I will join you.' I had thought, this is Guru Maharaj's institution. He did not say no, but the printing of books was a difficult task for him. He had no money. He was hardly collecting for maintaining. Printing of books is a big job, and there is no guarantee of sale." Unquote. Without printing books and going to the West, sannyas did not have meaning for a Bhai. And who knew when Tirtha Maharaj would sanction his taking sannyas? There was no point in going to Calcutta just to reside in an airy, well-lit room that he already had in Vrindavan. Abai wrote back to Tirtha Maharaj mentioning his direct order from Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati to preach to the English-speaking people. He wanted to go to the West right away, and he had thought that Chaitanya Math would welcome his offer. Both Abai and Tirtha Maharaj had their responsibilities, but perhaps they could work together to carry out the desire of the spiritual master. Abai asked Tirtha Maharaj to reconsider. On May 7th, 1959, Bhakti Vilas Tirtha Maharaj wrote back, "My suggestion is don't make any hasty decisions. For the time being, you stay with us and engage yourself in the service of the society and then accept Sri Danda Sannyas. The purpose of accepting Sri Danda is to serve the society, his temple. If that is your desire, then Sri Chaitanya Math will decide about your going to America to preach and make all arrangements. It can never be the principle of the society to let one act according to his individual attempt or desire. The society will decide after consulting with the heads what is to be done by whom. That is what I want to say. First of all, it is necessary to identify with the society. In order to preach in America or in other foreign countries, it is important to have a dignified organisation in the background. And secondly, it is necessary to establish oneself in India before going to preach in foreign countries. Now, it is that there are no conferences or meetings in the West as before. Communication is done through the media of television. So, Abai could understand the needs and priorities of the Chaitanya Math, but he could not allow them to overrule what he considered the highest mandate, preaching as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had ordered. Abai had offered his services to the leaders of the Chaitanya Math, thinking they might also see things his way. He thought that with the world's crying need for Krishna consciousness staring them in the face, they might see that this Abai Babu was convinced and enthusiastic and so should be sent right away with whatever he required. But they had other priorities. So, you see Srila Prabhupada's, desire to fulfill his spiritual master's order, but that's coupled with Srila Prabhupada's own compassion. So in other words, if Srila Prabhupada just hung around in India for another 10, 15 years, how many peoples, would just suffer in countries, women, children and families? How many lives just go on in a very torturous way, needing Krishna consciousness and yet going without that? For some people their lives are so miserable that, getting through the end of the week is a very difficult task. And here they're just thinking, yeah, look, let's just, there's no hurry. So Srila Prabhupada had a whole, mood of compassion that was just burning, to literally help people. And he understood that they needed Krishna consciousness straight away. He had the same mood his spiritual master had. There's no time to wait. Just like Srila Prabhupada, he spoke of independence to, Gandhi, first India must have independence. No. This is too important. It cannot wait. Lord Chaitanya's movement cannot wait for anything. It's too important. Like that. That's the mood of a devotee in preaching. You know, this day, someone can take to Krishna consciousness. This day, this person cannot wait. If that soul is lost today, then that may be millions of lifetimes in, you know, the material world that they will suffer. You know, devotees like that. So, you know, there was a whole different mood. So, Abai next turned to Kesava Maharaj in Mathura, and Kesava Maharaj told Abai to take sannyas immediately. After corresponding with Tirtha Maharaj, Abai felt some uncertainty about accepting sannyas, and now that he was being encouraged so strongly, he resisted. But Kesava Maharaj was insistent. Srila Prabhupada, I was sitting alone in Vrindavan, writing. My godbrother insisted to me, Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, you must do it. Without accepting the renounced order of life, nobody can become a preacher. So he insisted. Not he insisted, practically my spiritual master insisted. He wanted me to become a preacher, so he forced me through this godbrother. You accept. So unwillingly, I accepted. Kesavaji Gaudi Math was located in the midst of one of Mathura's downtown bazaars. The architecture was similar to that of the Vamsi Gopalaji temple. The atmosphere was secluded, as in a monastery. Abai was a familiar, welcome figure here. He had lived here, written and studied in the library here, edited the Gaudiya Patrika, and donated the deity of Lord Chaitanya, who stood on the altar, besides the deities of Radha and Krishna. Sri Sri Radha Vinoda Bihari Ji. But his visit during September of 1959 was not an ordinary one. He entered the math dressed in white, Abai Babu, but he would soon be leaving dressed in saffron as Swami. Abai had been living as a renunciate for 9 years. There was no need for him to observe a ceremony or to proclaim himself a sadhu by changing to saffron. But it was a parampara system that a man take Tridandi sannyas at the end of his life. He was aware of the cheating sannyasis, even in Vrindavan. He had seen so-called sadhus who did not preach but simply spent their days hunting for chapatis. Some swamis of Vrindavan had even indulged illicitly in what they had supposedly come here to reject, sex life. Such persons were making a mockery of sannyas. And there were the caste Goswamis also, who lived like ordinary householders, running temples as a business to support their families and accepting honour and donations from the public on the false basis of birth. Abai knew of these abuses of sannyas, but he also knew the real purpose of sannyas. Sannyas was for preaching. On the morning of September 17, 1959, in the 50 by 25 foot deity room on the second floor of the Kesavaji Math, a group of devotees sat before the deities of Radha Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. One level below the deities were pictures of the spiritual masters in disciplic succession. Jagannath Das Babaji, Bhaktivedanta Kaur, Guru Kishore Das Babaji, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, Bhakti Pragyana, Kesava Maharaj. Abai sat on a mat of kusha grass beside 90-year-old Sanatan, also to receive sannyas that day. Sitting opposite the two candidates, Narayan Maharaj, Kesava Maharaj's disciple, prepared to conduct the ceremony of mantras and offerings of grains and ghee into the fire. So this is where Narayan Maharaj somehow placed himself on an equal, if not higher level than Srila Prabhupada, because he was the, Purohit, the priest who performed the ceremony for sannyas.
It looks like this is different from Maharaj. He's a disciple of Kesava Maharaj.
Yeah, who's the other one?
You were a disciple of Mukhi Siddhartha.
No, he's not. No, he's not. He's a disciple of a godbrother of Srila Prabhupada. He's junior in every respect. Akinchana Krishna, that's exactly what you're thinking is what everyone thinks. They all think that he's actually a disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. That's what's propagated.
That's not true.
But here is where the myth is dispelled on this day, for all you viewers at home. Akinchana Krishna Das Babaji, a Bai's godbrother, known for sweet singing, played Mridanga and sang Vaishnava Bhajan. Sitting on a raised asana, His Holiness Keshav Maharaj presided. Since there had been no notices or invitations, only the math's few residents attended. Narayan Maharaj chanted the required mantras and then sat back silently while Keshav Maharaj lectured. Then, to everyone's surprise, Keshav Maharaj asked Abai to speak. Abai had not expected this. As he looked around at the gathering of devotees, he understood that the common language was Hindi. Only Keshav Maharaj and a few others spoke English. Yet he knew he must speak in English. After Abai's speech, each initiate received his sannyas danda, the traditional head-high staff made of 4 bamboo rods bound together and completely enwrapped in saffron cloth. So, Keshav Maharaj said that Abai would now be known as Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj and that Sanatan would be Muni Maharaj. After the ceremony, the 2 new sannyasis posed for a photo standing on either side of their sannyas guru who sat in a chair. Keshav Maharaj didn't impose any strictures on Abai. He simply encouraged him to go on preaching. Yet Abai knew that to become A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami did not merely mean that he was giving up family, home, comforts and business. That he had done 5 years ago, changing from white cloth to saffron cloth, from Abai Babu to Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, had a special significance. It was a mandate he had required, the irrevocable commitment. Now it was only a matter of time before Bhaktivedanta Swami would travel to the West as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had ordained. This was Bhaktivedanta Swami's realization of his new sannyas status. So, I'm going to have to skip some pages, about 10. That's my dismay. These pages here then describe how he then, the next step in his journey, we'll have to hear this maybe next time, how he paid for, wrote and published and personally sold the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. So he wrote the first 3 volumes of first canto, so he compiled the first canto, and used to go out, selling those books. While he was selling those books, he would pick up enough copies so he could earn some money by the sales of books, so that they could print more and get the next. So that's a very nice. But just to conclude, and with those Śrīmad, he understood that going to the West with books was very important if you wanted to be successful. You see. So again, it's not just walking down to the ship, jumping on the ship, and aloha. He wrote the first 3 volumes and had to go and personally sell the editions and the Bhakti Godhead to get a little bit of money to print, and he would personally, to save money, he would go personally to where the paper was, select the paper, and if he could, he would carry it then, to the printer's place, whatever he could do. Very difficult years with no money. But, so, I'm going to have to skip that. My apologies, Srila Prabhupada. He also had published the Easy Journey to Other Planets as well. So, and then of course he also moved to the Radha Damodar temple, which was where the Acharyas, Jiva Goswami, the Goswamis, literally compiled and distributed, the hub from where the Vaishnava literatures were originally distributed. So it was very, and the samadhi there of is it Rupa Goswami? Yeah. So taking inspiration. So let's just okay. We'll come in here at I better skip a few pages. So then he had to get his the no objection form and the visa and the passport and so many things, and then he had to get Srimati Maharaji to agree to let him go. So I'll just skip a lot of that. So I'll just come to this part here. Okay. Just to summarise, this is now, we've gone to 1965, 13th of August. So today's the 8th and the 9th. So it must be by the Tithi, that on the Pratipat, that they're calculating this date. Still, it was August 13th, just a few days before Janmashtami, the appearance day anniversary of Lord Krishna. The next day would be his own 69th birthday, 69. During these last years he had been in Vrindavan for Janmashtami. Many Vrindavan residents would never leave there. They were old and at peace in Vrindavan. Bhaktivedanta Swami was also concerned that he might die away from Vrindavan. That was why all the Vaishnava sadhus and widows had taken vows not to leave, even for Mathura, because to die in Vrindavan was the perfection of life. And the Hindu tradition was that a sannyasi should not cross the ocean and go to the land of the Malechas. But beyond all that was the desire of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and his desire was non-different from that of Lord Krishna. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had predicted that the chanting of the Hare Krishna would be known in every town and village of the world. Bhaktivedanta Swami took a taxi down to the Calcutta port. A few friends and admirers, along with his son Vrindavan, accompanied him. He writes in his diary, "Today at 9 a.m, embarked on MB Jaladuta. Came with me Bhagavati, the Dwavan of Sindhya, Sanshir, Mr. Sengupta and Mr. Ali and Vrindavan." So Prabhupada was carrying a Bengali copy of Chaitanya Charitamrita, which he intended to read during the crossing. Somehow he would be able to cook on board, or if not, he would starve. He could starve, whatever Krishna desired. He checked his essentials: passenger ticket, passport, visa, P-form, sponsor's address. Finally it was happening. And of course he had a couple of hundred sets of the 3-volume sets of his Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. But they were going separately. Srila Prabhupada, with what great difficulty I got out of that country. Some way or another, by Krishna's grace, I got out so that I could spread the Krishna consciousness movement all over the world. Otherwise, to remain in India, it was not possible. I wanted to start a movement in India, but it was not at all encouraged. Unquote. The black cargo ship, small and weathered, was moored at a dockside, a gangway leading from the dock to the ship's deck. Indian merchant sailors curiously eyed the elderly saffron-dressed sadhu as he spoke last words to his companions, and then left them and walked determinedly toward the boat. For thousands of years, Krishna Bhakti had been known only in India, not outside. except in twisted, faithless reports by foreigners. And the only Swamis to have reached America had been non-devotees, Mayavadi impersonalists. But now Krishna was sending Bhaktivedanta Swami as his emissary. Now I'll just read one section from Srila Prabhupada's lecture as to why he chose America. This is from an arrival address in Los Angeles, 1975. This life is meant for reviving our lost Krishna consciousness. There is Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, how is it happening that this place was a church and nobody was coming, so much so that they had to sell it to others? We purchased it. When I first came here to see this church, there was nobody. The place is the same. The people is the same. I have not brought men from India. Why is it crowded now? This is the proof that in everyone's heart, Krishna consciousness is there. Nitya Siddha Krishna Bhakti Sadhya Kabunaya. It is not artificial way of taking something sentimentally. Otherwise, how in my absence all these boys and girls are maintaining the status quo very nicely? I am very glad. That is required. This is the proof that in everyone's heart there is Krishna consciousness. Nitya Siddha Krishna Bhakti Sadhya Kabunaya Savanadi Shuddha Chitte Karya Udaya. It is, it is not an artificial giving something, imposing something to become Krishna conscious. No, the Krishna consciousness is there in everyone's heart. It has to be awakened by certain process. That process is Shravanam Kirtanam, 9 different types of devotional service. So anywhere, it doesn't matter, either in India or outside, people thought like that. The Krishna consciousness is the monopoly business for the Indians or for the Hindus. They were thinking like that. It cannot be preached. No one will take it. But I thought, if Krishna is God, why it will not be taken by everyone? It must be taken. So, this is also Los Angeles, but a couple of days later. He says, so his prediction will never go in vain. That is a fact. So my plan was that I shall go to America. America is the leading country of the world. If I can convince the younger generation of America, they will take up. I am old man. I came here at the age of 70 years. Now I'm 76. So my warning is already there. In 1971, I had a severe heart attack. So the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is now in your hands. You are American, Australian, Indian, boys and girls, very intelligent and graced by Krishna. You are not poverty-stricken. You have enough resources, prestige, everything materially. You are well equipped. If you kindly take this Krishna consciousness movement seriously, your country will be saved and the whole world will be saved. So I especially appeal to the Americans whose boys and girls are helping me so much. Please take this philosophy. Try to understand this philosophy. Make your life successful. Your country and the whole world. You are helping other parts of the world who are not very much developed with money, resources. That is a very good idea. But in your country, you do not see how the younger generation are going astray, how they're baffled and confused. You should take care of this. The flower of your country, they are becoming hopeless, confused. Try to save them. And this is the only remedy, Krishna consciousness, that can save your country and the whole world. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. No time for questions, so we'll just leave it there. So on this day, we celebrate Srila Prabhupada coming to the USA, coming to the USA, and we celebrate not just this day, but years and years and years of impossible tasks, determined devotional service, and a burning compassion to help people like you and I who we never met and give Krishna consciousness, which he understood was meant for everyone and was the only remedy for material suffering. Jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.